the Russian president, to North Korea, where he's been meeting Kim Jong-Un, sharing their innermost thoughts, apparently, at a summit in Pyongyang. I'm joined now with Dr. Jenny Mathers, who's a senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University, an expert on Russia. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. What have we learned from their sharing of their innermost thoughts?
Well, one major achievement of this visit is the signing of a mutual defense pact, and I think this is really the thing to focus on because under this pact, from what we understand, Russia and North Korea will, regard each other as allies, but also be willing to come to each other's defense in the case of aggression against one or the other. And depending on how loosely this is interpreted, this really opens the door potentially for, certainly in the short term, for North Korea to not only provide more ammunition than it already has, but potentially even to provide troops to fight in the war in Ukraine. And Russia to provide all kinds of assistance to North Korea, which could sort of support their economy and make them a stronger and more stable country. So I think it is quite significant for all of the hyperbole and the high flown language. I think there's some very concrete, practical things which have come out of this visit.
They've signed a mutual defence treaty, as they're calling it. Kim Jong-un saying he fully supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What will North Korea want in return for that sort of rhetorical and military support?
So what North Korea wants is what it can't easily provide for itself. So agricultural products, food, but also technology. There's a mention of sort of medical technology and support of various kinds. So the more of the nuts and bolts of everyday life that the North Korean economy really just has not been able to supply its people with. If North Korea can get these kinds of things from Russia, then it will create a much more comfortable life for its people, but also potentially a more politically stable life for the North Korean leader.
Thanks very much for that. That's Dr. Jenny Mathers, a senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University.
Now, the sun has just set in North Korea, but it is still party time in Pyongyang after President Putin's first visit to North Korea in 24 years. Well, is that your kind of party? It's the sound of the main square in Pyongyang, where North Korea's Kim Jong-Un pulled out all of the stops to greet one of his few allies. Vladimir Putin received a rapturous red carpet welcome with crowds waving balloons, flags and roses as a marching band played and ceremonial gunfire rang out. I'm sure you can picture it. North Korea's Kim Jong-Un called Putin the dearest friend of the Korean people, said he fully supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And then the two leaders signed a pact of economic and military cooperation, which Kim called thoroughly peaceful and defensive. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to John Nielsen-Wright, who's head of the Japan and Korea's programme at the Centre for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge. Can you put into context the significance of this meetup?
It's very significant. I mean, it's obviously a much closer relationship than has existed in the past. It's not unexpected. President Putin, of course, met President Kim Jong-un last autumn in the Far East, and there have been efforts by the Russians to cement the bilateral relationship. We had a visit in March by the Russian head of intelligence, and of course, as has been well telegraphed, even though North Korea doesn't admit to this, it has been providing considerable amounts of arms, artillery shells, missiles to assist Russia in its conflict in Ukraine. And of course, from Korea's point of view, from North Korea's point of view, this closer relationship is beneficial for a lot of reasons. It has helped to weaken and undermine the international sanctions regime, which is an attempt, of course, to prevent North Korea from developing its nuclear weapons capability. We saw Russia veto in the Security Council not so long ago continuation of the so-called panel of experts set up internationally to keep an eye on North Korea's nuclear proliferation and development plans. That's a further material enhancement, if you like, of North Korea's strategic ambitions. And there has been a real appetite on the part of the North Koreans to secure active security support from Russia to help develop its cutting-edge technology, particularly in the satellite space area. It's yet to be determined whether, in fact, the Russians are willing to give that support. But one thing we see coming out of this visit is a clear commitment to work much more closely together as security, economic, trade and financial partners. And that's obviously a worry to the United States and its allies.
And can you also put into context just how much all of that, or any of that, changes the world order? And I mean, I hate to be selfish about it, but I'm going to do the UK thing, changes our own security, if at all, in this country?
Well, I think for Britain it really does matter. I mean, we are an Indo-Pacific power. We've made that very clear through the Integrated Review and last year the publication of the so-called Integrated Review Refresh. East Asia remains a very important part of the world for us economically. Our bilateral partnership with South Korea, underscored by the recent Downing Street Declaration. Last year, of course, we had a summit, we had a state visit by President Yoon, the South Korean president. For us, it really matters that for one of our very important liberal democratic allies, they remain safe and secure. And North Korea's cooperation with Russia is making that harder for us. And of course, for us in Europe, any efforts by North Korea to support Russia in maintaining its aggression in Ukraine is clearly not in our interest. So this matters in both geographical theatres, and it matters also because we've seen so much progress by North Korea in developing its security capabilities.
So the agreement, which guarantees mutual help in the event of aggression, the fact that that is a public agreement, the message is being sent out, you and I are talking about it today, is that so very different to what has happened before, or it's in the publicity of it that we hold a difference?
I think it's the latter. I mean, as a declaratory statement, this is designed to say from Moscow and Pyongyang's perspective that efforts by the United States to shore up its alliance partnerships with its traditional partners, Tokyo and Seoul, will be met by a similar initiative. But if you look at the substance, what does that mean? If there were an attack on Russia or on North Korea, then the two countries have pledged to work together. But that's still fairly ambiguous in terms of what it actually means in substance. And hopefully it'll never come to that. I mean, the response on the part of the US and its allies is defensive rather than offensive. And for Russia, of course, there's not only the relationship with North Korea to consider, there's the relationship with South Korea. There are important trading ties. Russia is concerned that South Korea not go further in its support for Ukraine. South Korea has yet to provide, if you like, lethal support to support Ukraine in its war against Russia. And this has been a bit of a red line for the South Koreans. If Russia were to provide unambiguous material help to North Korea that could allow it to undermine the security of South Korea, we might see a very different sort of relationship and a greater appetite on the part of the South Koreans to do something more substantive when it comes to supporting Ukraine. So both countries are, in a sense, aware that they need to be careful about not crossing one another's red lines. And that's why I think this has been couched in fairly ambiguous terms. It's not a material change, but it does signal, I think, greater political and diplomatic coordination by these two authoritarian regimes.
There is some concern here, John, that perhaps defence and our place on the world stage is not playing a big enough part in our domestic politics and in the general election campaign. I wonder whether you would agree with that. I mean, are we obsessing about capital gains tax whilst Armageddon looms?
No, I don't think that's fair, actually. And I think if you look at the effort that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party has placed on inoculating themselves from the criticism that Labour has been weak on defence, I think you do see a serious continued engagement, the discussion about the share of our defence expenditure, that it should be at 2.5% of GDP. Both of the main parties have signalled their support for that idea. I think it's a reminder that we live in a very perilous and uncertain world, getting more so by the minute. And I think you will see, if the polls are to be believed and Labour is returned in a couple of weeks' time, a new government that will need to take a pretty robust position on maintaining our security interests. The question is the British public prepared to support those initiatives, particularly when it involves extensive commitments, quite some distance geographically from the UK itself.
It's all very interesting stuff, isn't it? John Nielsen-Wright, who's head of the Japan and Korea's programme at the Centre for Geopolitics, which is at the University of Cambridge.